Hello and welcome to Back Chat from the Arc in Headingley. And isn't this the most exciting week of the year, with the Ladbrokes Challenge Cup final looming this weekend? So to bring us all back to earth, let's meet today's panel. Danny Lockwood from League Weekly, Gareth Walker from the Sunday Mirror, Daily Mirror and the Sunday People, and also Martyn Sadler from League Express. But it is, all joking aside, it is the most exciting week of the year, isn't it? Is this going to be the classic final?
Well, we say it every year, don't we, Dave? I think the last couple of years we had a sense that with Castleford and with the Kingston Rovers that their kind of race was almost run before they got there. But this time we have the two bona fide big hitters from Super League. We have two teams that are really on song form-wise, I think. And I think when you go down the teams, one, you know, player by player, you find it very difficult to separate them. We haven't had a classic, it doesn't feel like to me, since we've been back at the new Wembley. But, you know, we live in hope, and I figure this one could be it.
Yeah.
Well, I think the thing we've got to think about, there are two key issues with the Cup final, Dave. One is whether the Warrington pack can stand up to the Hull pack, because most people think the Hull pack, led by Gareth Ellis, is probably the toughest pack in the game at the moment, and it's been the foundation of their success. And the second thing is the battle at half-back, because Mark Sneed's been in great form recently, you know, kicking 40-20s, doing so many great things. But I wonder about Carlos Twimavavi playing alongside him at standoff half against Warrington's pair of Gidley and Sandow. I think if Gidley and Sandow really hit it off, they could do a lot of damage. And Twimavavi, I think a lot depends on him, because if he can really, you know, work well with Sneed, I think that really, you know, will give Hull a great chance of winning.
If he plays, it might be Jordan Abdul yet. We don't know.
Well, you never know. Yeah.
We never know.
You don't.
Gareth, I mean, it's mouth-watering on so many fronts, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think from a media point of view as well, there are so many great stories around the game. You know, we're talking about the top two, but then there's so many subplots within that. You know, Mark Sneed's a great one. You know, last time he was at Wembley, he was subbed in the first half by Darryl Powell at Castleford. You know, can he go out there and this time stamp his mark on a Challenge Cup final? You know, this is Chris Standow's first real appearance on a big stage in this country. Is he going to step up and show those brilliant skills he's got? And then I think you can go through both teams. You know, the clash of the hookers, the back rowers. There's a contrast of styles. There's so many stories, subplots. Best two teams. Surely it is about time.
I think we've hit the nail on the head in terms of the half-back battle, because I think that is going to be crucial. And Sneed has had.
But isn't that dependent on the forwards? Isn't that dependent on which pack gets on top?
Well, it does, but I do think that they are very well matched packs, and I agree with you about Hull have been the form team. The form forward pack in the competition this year, I would say there's no doubt about that. But they've got some big name players of Warrington, and you know, Chris Hull will never take a back.
No, a great player.
Ashton Sims is out there looking for silverware. I think if everything else is equal, Dave, and the form in the league will tell you that maybe it will be, then it's going to come down to the half-backs. And I just think that Mark Sneed, who has had a standout season and had a terrific game at the weekend, I just think that big game experience of Gidley and Sandow, for me, if I was having a couple of quid down, that could be key.
And then there's the unknown factor, of course, which is how will Hull react to that sort of, you know, thing of the hoodoo of never having won at Wembley. Will that affect them in any way? You know, obviously they're going to say it won't, but I'm never quite sure about that.
Well, they're not playing it down, are they? I mean,
no.
I think other clubs might have played it down, but they've actually made it. I mean, I remember the semi-final press conference, they came in, and that was almost the first thing that Lee Radford said. About this never won at Wembley, we're going to have to lay that one.
And at some point they're going to have to lay that bogey, aren't they?
Yeah.
And you know, if ever there was a great time to do it, then this is the one. But you think back to last time they were there in 2013 against Wigan, and I thought that was probably the dullest Challenge Cup final, if we're honest, that we've seen for a long time. Hull were incredibly limited that day.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for that, I think, was, if you remember, Gareth Ellis left the field injured after about 15 minutes, and from that point on they were rudderless. So, you know, hopefully Gareth will, you know, last the 80 minutes this time, and I think it is going to be a fabulous game, and as you say, so many different battles going on the field.
Yeah.
It should be a dream to promote, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
You know,
I think you'd rather have Twimavavi at standoff than you would in the centre, because I think
possibly.
He's
well, he is a standoff, isn't he? I think
there's no way that he won't be playing.
No.
And they have on occasion shunted him back out into the centre.
I assume Kirky Yeaman will be in the centre. He's the only survivor from last time they won the Cup in 2005 in Cardiff, of course.
Yeah.
I think when Martyn mentions 2013, it was noticeable at the press conference this week for it that Hull certainly didn't shy away from that either. So Lee Radford said, I think he said if Carlsberg could do Wade not to approach a cup final, that would have been how they did. They got everything wrong on the day and the build-up, and the guys that played that day will have learnt from that, I think, as well. And the other noticeable thing was Gareth Ellis saying he feels he's never done himself justice in a final fully yet, whether it be with a grand final with Leeds, you know, the injury with Hull, and he wants to get out there and stamp his mark on a final.
Yeah, never got to a grand final with West Tigers, did he, when he was out in Australia?
Not with West Tigers, no, but I think did he play with Leeds in a grand final?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
he said, you know,
and
he obviously felt
challenge.
part of the winning team and he played his part, but he felt he's never fully done himself justice as a player and shown what he can do on the biggest stage. I think they'll take from those defeats.
I know that Gareth Ellis has said it as officially retired from international football, but if I was Wayne Bennett, I'd be knocking his door down to try and get him to reconsider. Because I think
he's had a great season.
He's had a
best
terrific
season since he's arrived at Hull.
Absolutely, and I think that he's, you know, he's. I know you guys have discussed before Man of Steel. I think he's definitely up there. I think that this. Again, I'll come back to this point that in past seasons or in recent seasons, I felt we've had two finalists, one of whom was head and shoulders favourite, and it was almost with the other finalists as though that was their achievement, enjoying the Wembley weekend. That specifically is not going to be part of the chemistry this weekend, because you've got two teams that really have a point to prove, and nothing
think they can win it. Both think they can win it. That's the point.
It's not about getting to Wembley. It's about getting their hands on that cup.
How much does the Challenge Cup need this to be a good cup final for the sake of the competition itself?
Oh, it certainly it doesn't hurt, does it? And just for the game, not just for the competition, but because it's on terrestrial television and you get the huge audiences. It's as Tony Smith said this week, this is the advert for our game really every year, isn't it? This is the match that people who might not watch Rugby League tune into. So I think on a wider picture it's important for Rugby League, but the cup itself as well. We're talking about classic finals. I think probably 2005 might be the last one when Hull edged past Leeds in Cardiff. We could do with that, that showcase game where we have two teams equally matched standing toe to toe.
We do tend to say, don't we, that we want a showcase game every year. Of course, we'd like one every year. It would be marvellous if every year it was an exciting game like, Wigan Hull in 1985, as you say, Hull Leeds in 2005. But, last year, 50-0, it was a disappointingly one-sided game, rescued, I thought, by Lizzie Jones, who was actually the real star of the show last year. And, of course, she's going to be presenting the trophy this year. I think that's a great move by the RFL, the First Lady of Rugby League, I think she is. But I think we can go into it much more confident this year. And if there's more than 10 points in it at the end, I'd be astonished.
That'd be a surprise. The one thing out of the 50-0 last year is that you saw some spectacular tries.
You did.
And of course,
it'll always be remembered. It'll always be remembered because of Lizzie Jones, Tom Briscoe's 5 tries, the unveiling of the Wembley statue. That will always be an iconic.
And I do think that it's always an event. It's the Challenge Cup final. Whatever happens, it's always an event. Whatever the actual match throws up for us, we're the Rugby League purists. We're the ones that really want, something to remember. I really do think we'll get it this year, because it isn't just the fact that they're well-matched teams. They're two teams that play really creative, off-the-cuff football, that can use those big spaces at Wembley. We saw, Martyn's couple of 40-20s this week. He's in the form of his life. This is redemption time for him. So many backstories going on, Dave, that I think that are going to actually come to life on Saturday.
I think the kicking game of both sides is going to be fascinating to see, because obviously Sneed is an expert in that aspect of the game, but Sandow and Gidley, I think, are going to have to match what he does. If Warrington are going to really
and Danny Houghton
win the game.
half as well, he gives them an extra dimension as well in that kicking from that kicking game.
And I think a 40-20. Sandow and Sneed in particular, both 40-20. Experts almost, and on the bigger pitch, that could be a 40-20 could turn the game. Couldn't it?
I think Danny Houghton's an interesting case. He's got a lot to. I think he's been a terrific player for years. Since he first appeared on the scene, probably 2008. I think it was when he really first made an impact, and he's really quite unlucky that there are so many good hookers knocking about. Let's face it, Josh Hodgson now is being tipped to play for England. Well, Josh had to leave Hull because he couldn't get past Danny Houghton, back in those days when he went to Hull Kingston Rovers.
And I also think that, talking about hookers, and as good as Houghton is, and as good as Josh Hodgson has been a revelation in the NRL this year, Darryl Clark, I thought, had a very uncomfortable first season when he left Castleford for Warrington. I think we're starting to see the Darryl Clark that made himself the England hooker a little bit more this season.
He's looking far better, isn't he?
He's a big lad for a number 9, and they don't mind sitting him in the back row for a while. I think he gives them a little bit more of an extra dimension than Danny Houghton does.
Contrasting styles again is that Warrington have two hookers, don't they? You know, Brad Dwyer comes off the bench,
I
and
think
sometimes
Brad
Clark
Dwyer's a
stays on
terrific
as well, and Dwyer needs to be considered because he can come on and change the game, whereas Houghton's probably going to play 80 minutes. So another fascinating clash of styles.
Again, you wouldn't want Houghton to be injured, would you, if you were a Hull fan?
No, that's fair.
And although it never is, it doesn't seem to be, does it?
You were saying about if you were Wayne Bennett, and the nation gave a collective shiver at the prospect of you picking the England team. But if you were, I mean, Jamie Shaw, Mark Sneyd, is this the kind of stage for them to prove that they can do it?
I think that.
Or have they done enough already?
No, I don't think you can ever do enough already where someone like Wayne Bennett is concerned, and thank God I'm not picking the England team, by the way, would you?
Yeah.
But the fact is this, I think that Sneyd's further ahead in the rankings, if you like, in terms of getting an opportunity to play in the Four Nations than Jamie Shaw is. I still think he's down there third or fourth in the list of likely selections, and I do think that it won't harm either of their chances to have a big game. But Shaw is going to be under the microscope, and he's going to be tested early by Gidley and Sandow.
We were at Hull the other night, weren't we? And Lee Radford said after that game that you know, Mark Sneyd's in the form of his life, fantastic, and he's doing everything that his club wants of him, and he thinks it's a battle between him and Luke Gale for the England team.
Yeah, it's been noticeable in recent weeks, and I think it's great that both Lee Radford and Sean Wayne have kind of been championing the Super League English halfbacks. You know, there has been this, the several reports of it's going to be Australian-born guys for the England, but both Radford and Wayne have said let's concentrate on the guys we've got here, and Sneyd and Gale have been terrific. So I absolutely think they both deserve to be considered, and if Sneyd steps up and wins the Landstad Trophy at weekend, then of course he should be in England contention.
The other halfback you throw into that mix is George Williams, and you talk about Sean Wayne, and we've congratulated Sean Wayne before for sticking with George Williams, who's now in the semi-final, although losing semi-final. He showed his worth that night, and you've got to applaud that kind of
absolutely. Yes, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more, and we want, I personally, I'm very dubious about this idea of, picking Australians with English grandfathers for England for the Four Nations or for the World Cup. I suspect we all are. But one of the interesting things about looking ahead again to the Cup final is that Hull have only got two players who were in Wayne Bennett's invited squad, earlier this year when he came over. They've only got Sneyd and Scott Taylor. There are various other. You've mentioned Shaw with Dan Houghton and so on. Liam Watts, for example. Yeah. A lot of other players who have not been selected in that apparent squad, who probably might feel they've got a big point to prove. I would if I were them.
You can't invite everybody in the competition along, and it was more of a get to know you. Hi, my name's Wayne Bennett than it was anything else. But it was
still revealing, wasn't it, about who was there?
It was, but at the same time, it was. I think there was a little bit of a nod to Steve McNamara's old squad. There was a little bit of of course, his assistant is Dennis Betts from Widnes. So you got Kevin Brown along, I think we can all agree he's pretty much out of contention now.
This season, he's not had a great season.
He's not had a great. He started off well, Widnes, but it's as is often the way. What do they say? Form is temporary, class is permanent. Yeah. The George, in terms of the halfbacks, I agree with you on Gale and Sneyd. I have a sneaky feeling, however, that George Williams can forget it, because I think Gareth Widdop is pretty much penciled in, as much as he's had a ropey time. But I would love to see. I would love a good news story like Luke Gale or Mark Sneyd to come through. Certainly over someone like Trent Hopkinson, who is being mooted as a likely.
Just on Williams has been terrific the last few weeks. I think even when Wigan have stuttered a bit, I think it's fair to say over the last few weeks, Williams have been terrific and really stepped up in the big games, and I think absolutely he deserves to be involved.
And just on that theme of patience, how much do you applaud Hull with Lee Radford? Because he could have gone. Any other club he might have gone. He might not have been the coach now who's seen a team 80 minutes away from a grand final in a Challenge Cup final.
And in a cup final of great stories, probably Lee Radford I think is one of the best ones. And we sat down with him at the media conference this week, and he was going through the tough times and the 9 successive defeats, I think it was. And he said that the kind of microscope that you get in Hull and the abuse that you would get was such that he couldn't go and watch his lad play for Skirlau for a while because it wasn't worth the hassle. And one of the best things he said about this winning run is now he can go back and watch his lad play and there's no hassle at the games. games.
Yeah.
But for Hull to stick by him through that, you know, there was banners at the games, there was chants, it was real pressure on the Monday, and Adam Pearson has stuck by his man, and terrific.
It's a popular good news story.
And success will be so much sweeter for Lee because of the tough times he's been through. You know, that's the point. It's always great to be successful when you've had tough times. I mean, I think he was the captain in 2008, wasn't he, when they lost to St Helens, if I remember rightly, or was he? I know he was the captain on one occasion when they played in the cup final.
He missed two when he was at Bradford. When he was at Bradford, he was left out of the team twice, which he's talked about this week about how tough it is to tell the players who are not playing. I think he got that out of the way quite early, didn't he? Because you know, privately behind the scenes. And Tony Smith on the other side. You've got to applaud Tony Smith as a coach, who's probably the most effective coach in Super League.
Certainly good at winning at Wembley. You know,
he's got a match record there, hasn't he? And if you're going to say anything off field could give a team the edge, you know, it could be that sense of calm and preparation and having been there that Tony Smith possesses over the raw emotion of the Lee Ratford story.
He's got a formula that works. In other words,
absolutely.
Yeah. Who's your Lance Todd? Who's your Lance Todd going to be?
I would. As a Yorkshireman, I'd love to say Mark Sneyd. If I was having a bet, I would probably say Chris Sandow, because it has to be someone that's on the field for 80 minutes, I think.
If Warrington win, I think it'll be Kirk Gidley. You know, I think he's going to rise to the challenge, quite frankly. If Hull win, I wouldn't be too surprised if it was Gareth Ellis.
Yeah,
but you know,
who would be, by the way, the oldest ever Lance Todd Trophy winner if he were to win it.
I was going to say, Alice, just from listening to him talk the other day, there was a calmness and a determination about him at the same time as, you know, it almost felt like this is my time, and I think if Hull win, he's going to be big for them.
I think captaincy is really important, you know, and it's something we sometimes underestimate in rugby league, but Gareth Ellis, I think, has shown how important that is. I mean, Kevin Sinfield obviously did before that, and I just think he's been outstanding as the Hull captain this year, and you know, after they had that terrible result at Widnes earlier in the season, I thought Ellis led them back from the brink and did it superbly. Okay, well, that's as far as we go for part one of this week's Back Chat, but we'll be talking much more about the Challenge Cup and everything else that's involved in Rugby League in parts 2 and 3. See you in a moment's time. Welcome back to the second part of Back Chat from the Arc at Headingley, building up to the big Challenge Cup, Ladbrokes Challenge Cup final this weekend. Of course, lots of stories, some fantastic stories, and hopefully more stories as well on Saturday night after the game. But one of the stories, quite intriguing little tale building up, is the appointment of the referee. Cumbria's Gareth Walker has got the gig, a part-timer in an era when we have full-time referees. What do you make of that?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? It's a brave choice as well, I think, you know, when you've got 8 full-time guys and they've gone for the part-time one. It's part of this thing that they will pick on form, isn't it? They've said under Steve Ganton, they've been very big on analysing performances every weekend, and then they pick whoever it is. You know, reputations have gone out of the window, as in past years. You know, it might have been a selection of 2 or 3 different ones. Now everybody's got a chance. And that's the way they've decided to go. You know, I had about an hour with Chris Kendall and Chris Campbell the other week, who were 2 of the full-time lads. But the thing that shone through was this whole form situation where every week they go in the week after, they all analyse each other's performances, and the guys who have performed best get the game. They said it's almost like being part of a team and a club, and it's completely performance-based now. It's almost like, you know, whatever big games you've had before doesn't count. And obviously Gareth Walker has taken advantage of that system, and he's got himself a huge match as a part-time official. He had one of the semi-final. I think he had the second semi-final, didn't he? So are you a fan of the appointment?
I'm a fan of the appointment from the point of view that Gareth Walker is a very, very good referee, has been probably the best in the championship for a lot of years, who has had opportunities to go full time but has chosen not to, and I respect him for that. I think it's a great appointment in terms of the message it sends out on a lot of levels, Dave, and having said all of that, I think it's completely and utterly bizarre. So why on earth do you bother having a full-time referees department, you know, when you are supposedly pushing the cream to the top, and then you overlook all of them. And we've talked in the first part of Back Chat today about how much this is our marquee event, how much we are trying to market the entire game, you know, to the nation, and suddenly, on the biggest stage, you're giving it to a guy who is acknowledged, and notwithstanding what Gareth just said, that notwithstanding all of that, you're saying comes from literally the second tier of refereeing. What if that game hinges? What if that game hinges on well, he hasn't had the number of Super League games, for instance, that Ben Thaler or Phil Bentham or James Child have naturally had. Yeah. So he has not had the level of exposure that they have. They are time-served international referees, and he's not. And so we're taking our marquee game. And as much as I applaud the decision on a human, on a personal, on a rugby level,
I think you are applauding it, actually.
No, because I'm pleased for Gareth Walker, and I hope he has an absolute cracking game.
We don't notice him, really. That would be the best.
And I hope he justifies it. But in terms of a risk on the biggest stage, Dave, I don't think anybody could argue that it's not a risk.
Is it? Was it a risk? Is it a risk?
Well, it must be, I suppose, in one sense. I mean, Gareth was talking about what a great team. You know, how great the bonding is of the referees at Red Hall. But Gareth surely can't be involved in that, or at least as much as you would imagine, because presumably he's working in his full-time job. I'm sure he must get in sometime, obviously, but clearly he must. But not all the time, you would imagine.
But if he's the best man for the job, I mean, it's not saying all the other referees are rubbish.
No,
because you can only pick one referee for a cup final, and surely it's better. We used to have the situation where you knew which referee it was going to be in a cup final,
the thing is,
year after year after year after year.
If you've got a team of people who are full time, you know, and then you appoint a part-time person to the biggest job of the year, then it does tend to suggest that the full-time people, you know, there's something questionable.
If he has a great game, and we hope he does, and I certainly hope he does.
What's the need for full-time referees?
Why are we bothering?
Why are we bothering? Yeah. Good point.
I mean, I can see that point, but on the flip side of that, I think it'll be absolutely terrific for recruitment of referees because it's showing that now there is a pattern, and not just Gareth Walker, the fact that Chris Campbell and Jack King and Chris Kendall have moved up quickly and got into the top flight. There's an opportunity, I think, for people who think, you know, actually I could be going out refereeing these games, and I think this will send that message out, albeit I can kind of see the point on the full-time guys at these events.
That's exactly. I was talking to someone that's a senior member of the refereeing department during the semi-final or after the semi-final, and he said exactly the same thing. I hope Gareth or one of the part-timers gets the cup final gig because our recruitment's going to be so much, and we need that.
It smacks of a decision then, Dave, that has been made for other reasons than
not necessarily. That might be the best referee. The best referee's got the gig at the moment. The best referee's got the gig, and as a result of that, you know, I'm one of those people who doesn't analyse referees.
He's not been frustrated. He had the semi-final, didn't he? So he's obviously been performing well. I don't think he's got this off one good game.
I think he's a good referee. He's a very good referee.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that Steve Ganson is the match officials director, and Steve, who I really like and think's a great guy, but he often made eccentric decisions when he was a referee. You know, one or two that we can think of. And you know, maybe this is just another.
Do you think he's made that? Do you think this is a Ganson decision, or do you think it's come from above him?
Well, who knows?
I think it would have come. Well, we don't know.
I don't think they would have appointed a part-time referee to try and recruit more. I do think that he
obviously think he's the best man for the job.
Because if he's not up to the job, then they're not doing him a favour. Are they?
Yeah,
they're throwing him to the lions. But he is up to the job.
And it's their position that,
he's up to the job.
if it's Steve Ganson's position will be in the spotlight over this. So he's got to live and die by these decisions, and it's a brave decision.
Let's just hope it's the one story of the weekend that we're not talking
about. And you almost get a sense these days for the televised games that the video referee is probably more important than the referee, because the referee doesn't have to make those big decisions. It's the video referee,
which is Ben Thaler,
who did the cup final last year. So he's got backup there.
Well, we shall see.
We will.
Yeah. Well, we're looking forward to it. That's the bottom line. We're looking forward to this, and it's going to be hopefully a great cup final. And inevitably at this time of year, you start thinking about cup finals past, and one of the great cup finals of all time, 1998, Sheffield Eagles, etc., etc. And what a story we've had this week that Sheffield Eagles could be going bust.
Yeah, it's a big story, isn't it, for that? You know, and it's a real shame as well. And people will inevitably now look to their decision to go full time, which, you know, is probably a fair shout. It looked very quick for them. You know, they'd had one good season, and if you contrast them with Halifax, who also kind of got into that fall last year, they took a different view. And now it looks like, you know, I believe they're okay until the end of the season, but they need something to happen very quickly.
Well, part of the problem, Dave, part of the problem for them is the dramatic fall in central income that they're going to suffer next year, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because this year they'll have got something like 720 or 30,000 pounds. I forgot the precise figure is, but next year it'll be something like 250 because they've fallen out of the top four. And the same thing applies to Bradford Bulls, of course. You know, you fall out of the top four and your income goes down absolutely dramatically. And it's a destabilising influence, really, for all the clubs in the Championship. On the other hand, Batley, you know, got into the top four and they'll get 700 odd thousand pounds next year, you know, and it's your income's going up and down.
It's a worrying trend for Rugby League as well, isn't it? Because, I mean, great Batley, great Lee, but we want the big cities. We need the big cities. And you've got two big cities there in Bradford and Sheffield.
Yeah, and you could throw Salford into that mix if you
Yeah.
really wished, Dave. But the fact is that what this is yet another salutary lesson in how not to run a rugby league club.
It is.
This is everything that for the last 15, 20 years we've talked about trying to get away from. Boom and bust management. You know, reaching for the stars that you know you're never going to get. And that's what Sheffield have done. And the ironic thing to me is that when they went full-time, they lost the axis of their team, Barney and Walker, who went to Batley Bulldogs part-time in the top four.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry for everybody at Sheffield, and there are livelihoods involved, and the game could do without it, but they've no one to blame but themselves.
Why has this been like that? Gareth, you follow the Championship very closely, and when this whole eights thing was set up, I distinctly remember Mark Aston saying it's a mistake because clubs will overstretch themselves, clubs will try to buy a dream that isn't within their scope, and everything suggested that Sheffield would never go down that route, and yet they have gone down that route. So why is that happening?
I know those are the questions I'll ask. I think that discrepancy in the funding is a big issue. You know, it looked very aspirational, didn't it? Getting that top four, you get the extra money. But I mean, this year when Leeds have dropped down with the big crowds coming here and go, your financial reward for getting in that four will be fairly significant compared to playing in the Shield.
Yeah.
I don't think you need that big drop. You know, there's no big drop like that in Super League or anywhere else in the game where it's that big. And I think that's leading to clubs, you know, they got in there 1 year, they think we go full time, we'll be in every year. It's not the way to go.
Batley's the lesson there. Batley's the lesson.
Yeah, and Halifax. Well, Halifax got in last year. They didn't
well.
go full time.
They are, but the thing about Sheffield was though that they, you know, they've always been a very well run, very tightly run club. But in the last year or two, they got a major investor coming on board who, you know, had deep pockets and persuaded them to go on this full time route. Then pulled out at the start of the season. So the club was committed to a full time squad, and then they lost the guy who had, you know, led them down that route. And Ian Swire, who's the chairman, has also pulled out, or is pulling out at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that has put, you know, given them such big problems. They do say that they are talking to other investors, and it would be a great shame if Rugby League, you know, came out of Sheffield, really, because it's a great sporting city. You know, a lot of the Olympic success that we've enjoyed in the last few weeks, you know, comes from the Sheffield Institute of Sport. I mean, you know, the government has given £10 million to the RFL to develop a centre of excellence. Well, potentially Sheffield ought to be a city that should be bidding for that.
Well, let's hope we can keep professional rugby league alive in Sheffield.
Yeah.
That's got to be the first.
They've got this new stadium being built, haven't they, as part of the Olympic?
Well, it was a timing thing as well, wasn't it? I mean, hindsight's wonderful, isn't it? But when you look back and your ground situation isn't concrete yet, you know, they're playing somewhere they won't be. You know, it would have been better to have that other season as part-time state challenging at the top.
It was a rash decision. They were blinded by the light, and it's a shame, and it is a shame for Mark Aston and for a lot of the people invested in Sheffield. Ian Swire as well.
Absolutely. For so long they've been an example of the Championship.
They have been exemplars of the game. So that is why it is just they've succumbed to it. And let's just hope, I've got to say, that this is just Sheffield, because I can see one or two other bigger name clubs going the same way at the end of this season.
Yeah, it is a worry at the moment, isn't it?
It really is.
Did Sheffield bounce back? Because, I mean, we talk about 98. This Sheffield club is not actually the 98 club, is it? Because that went off. And this grew as a phoenix out of that. Do you think it can bounce back? And how much does Rugby League need Sheffield? Because it's never really hit the mark in Sheffield, has it?
Well, they got to Wembley, of course, and you know, they used to get quite respectable crowds back in those days when they played at the Don Valley Stadium, without being, you know, too great. But Sheffield is a great sporting city, you know, and it's a, you know, it's part of the so-called Northern Powerhouse, isn't it? It's a city that we want in the game. We want them to think that they can get into Super League, because, you know, Sheffield. I worked in Sheffield for 20 years, And there's a terrific rivalry there between Sheffield and Leeds. I can tell you, Sheffield people love nothing more than beating Leeds. You know, they think they're the leading city in Yorkshire.
But they're talking about Leeds United, Sheffield United, and Sheffield Wednesday.
We can transfer that to Rugby League.
We've been trying to transfer it for a lot of years.
We should do.
There are still good, very good people involved, aren't there? You know, Mark Aston and John Whalen, the chief executive now, and they have come before again and rebuilt. I'm sure they can again, but it's just such a big blow at a crucial time when they were looking to make that,
Well, I was really. I would love to see some big games in Sheffield. You know, I was disappointed.
But it needs a venue. I mean, the Don Valley was never a great venue.
Well, I was disappointed when we didn't have any World Cup games in Sheffield. You know, they were hoping to get some at Bramall Lane. I mean, Bramall Lane, I think, is a tremendous stadium, very near to the centre of Sheffield. It could potentially stage a magic weekend in Sheffield, or a Challenge Cup semi-final. You name it. It's a terrific venue.
But the owners and the city of Sheffield is to kind of invest in that as well, in the way that Newcastle has. Not to the same extent, clearly, Martyn. It is sticking to the rugby side of this. Let's just hope that Sheffield Eagles survive and that they rebuild and that they're part of a vibrant championship next year and that other people learn the lessons of it.
And they've done so much development work and even then they hit the buffers with that and through no fault of their own when the RFL wouldn't permit them to continue running an academy team this year. They've wanted to develop their own players for so long and put a load into it in an area that's tougher than some of the more others, so it would be a huge shame and let's hope that they can rise again.
Yeah, let's touch on the middle eights. I mean, top eights look to be sorted now, don't they? I think the top four as it is will probably be the top four when we come to the business end of things. But the middle eights, wow. Lee's win at Salford the other week, and that has just shaken the whole thing up, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, I think I don't think they'll say it publicly, but Lee will be looking at it now and thinking we might be able to even avoid that £1 million game. They go to Hull KR next, which is a tough game, but then after that they have two home games, Huddersfield at home and Batley at home. And I think if they win those two games, that's 10 points. You're in the top three, then, aren't you? So they'll be looking at it now, and that will obviously the likes of Salford and Huddersfield and still Hull KR are going to be looking at it.
You would imagine that the crucial game will be Huddersfield at home, wouldn't you? Because if they can beat Huddersfield at home, even if they lose at Hull Kingston Rovers, which you would, you'd think Hull Kingston Rovers look the second strongest club after Leeds.
And they're very strong at home.
You would imagine that they beat Leeds.
So you reckon Salford Huddersfield are the most vulnerable? Salford Huddersfield are the most vulnerable?
I think so. Absolutely. Yeah. Even if they lose to Huddersfield, even if they lose that match to Huddersfield, I still give you that feeling that they've got the big games in them when they want them. Yeah. And so I think you would probably say Huddersfield, knowing what's on the line, are going to go into that game at Lee as though that was their £1 million game, Dave. Yeah. And so I think then what it throws up the prospect of is a repeat of Salford and Lee in the £1 million game.
At Lee.
And
potentially at Lee.
And then, potentially at Lee, and then, boy, have we got a game to watch.
Wow.
We thought last year's was a big one.
That
is because I think that we're talking then about possibly the future of Salford.
Yeah.
Being
possibly the future of both clubs.
On the line. Well, Lee again, they've gambled.
They've both got chairmen who have invested a lot of money in the clubs.
I think Derek Beaumont had committed publicly to next year as well, spending the full cap wherever they were and having a sort of,
two shrinking violets as owners as well.
Yes.
Well, I bet we don't see them. I mean, that £1 million, I bet we don't see hide or hair of either of them. Neither of them would be a pound.
If indeed that's, as I said, we could still have Salford and Huddersfield, and then that
Lee Huddersfield's massive now, isn't it? That game is huge in 2 weeks.
And that is good. Good. Is this kind of? This
is what we wanted.
But does this justify the eights?
Not yet, but almost, Dave. We're getting there.
It needs, even if I'm still not convinced about it, and if we stick with it, it needs some tweaks. And one of them is that funding in the championship between fourth and fifth. Things like that can be tweaked. And I'm still not convinced, but this year would help if you ended up with some games like that for sure.
I think I'd still rather see bottom two and top two.
Yeah.
Because then you'd have a great game every week. I mean, fair dues to Batley and one or two others, but
the fact is that Batley and Featherstone have fallen away. They've not really been up to the mark in the middle eight.
Leeds are clearly
and Leeds' performances have tended to obscure that a little bit, haven't they?
Yeah.
Everybody's looking at Lee. I mean, I thought London did very well.
London have been great.
They're looking. I mean, I really hope a lot of people in London were watching that game. At the weekend. No, I suspect not, probably. But they looked a real. I mean, London for so many years, to my eyes, have looked like a team that's not really been a team. If you see what I mean. Yeah. Not much team spirit there. But I think Andrew Henderson, who I think is the coach of the year across the board issue. Maybe Lee Radford's obviously,
and Chris Chester
in Super League and Chris Chester, but Henderson's done a fantastic job, I think.
Yeah.
And
he's created a real team. He's created a real team.
Well, what a discussion we've said here. And yet we have to go to the break. So that's the end of part 2. On Back Chat, we're back with the third and final part in just a few moments' time. So welcome back to the third and final part of Rugby League Back Chat from the Arc in Headingley. We're going to be getting onto your questions on Twitter. Don't forget you can get in touch with us at the Rugby League Back Chat Twitter account. Give us your questions for future programmes. We're going to get onto some of those questions in just a second. But briefly the NRL, because that's all boiling up nicely, isn't it? We're talking about the game over here. But over there, now the Broncos looked as though they were done and dusted not that long ago, and suddenly, wow, they're back in the mix, big time. Martyn.
They are, and it's an up and down competition because Cronulla, who have had that terrific winning run, have now lost 3 in a row.
Still up there, though.
Absolutely. Well, they are still up there in the top 4, but the real coming team is Canberra Raiders, of course, and they had a tremendous win at the weekend against Parramatta, coming back from 14-0 down to win 38-18. I think the score was something like that, and they did that without Josh Hodgson.
I was going to say, that was a brave decision by him, wasn't it? Because he's copped the ban. He could have taken an early plea and he could have got off, but then he would still have the potential of being banned during the playoffs. But he's lost points now on the Dally M. So
he has, but I don't think that's probably the most important thing from their point of view. I doubt whether that worries Ricky Stewart all that much. But I think the Raiders, it was great to watch their game at the weekend. They had an 18,500 crowd at their stadium. It's not the best stadium in the world, actually, isn't it? It used to be called Bruce Stadium. I forget its name now, but it's not the best stadium in the world. But their fans are really terrific. Not many Australian fans chant for their team, and yet at the weekend the Raiders fans were really doing the Icelandic Viking clap, as it's called.
They're the story of the season at the moment, just as Cronulla were a month ago. But that's the NRL for you, Dave. Brisbane are back on the bike again. North Queensland are showing signs of life again, having been in the doldrums. The one team, even if you go down the league, we've seen all the English boys, the four Burgesses at South Sydney, pull out another win, which they really needed, although it's too late for them. Roosters again gave an absolute hiding to Gareth Widdop and Mike Cooper's St George Illawarra Dragons. It really, really does turn, but of course the one consistent form team throughout the year has been Melbourne Storm, and there you've got Cameron Smith, Cooper Cronk, the old familiars.
But no Billy Slater. No Billy Slater at the moment.
Without Billy Slater.
Munster's some player though, isn't he?
But Cameron Munster has been one of the success stories of and he looks like an international in the making. I don't know if we'll see him this autumn, but it's all boiling up for a cracking thing. But of course, as Englishmen, we just want Canberra Raiders to keep going because Whitehead and Hodgson have been the stories of the NRL this year.
It's bringing back memories of the Green Machine, isn't it? And Meninga and Ricky Stewart himself, and what a great era that was for Rugby League there, and that's terrific.
And Joe Burgess, I think Wigan fans would be very pleased. I think he spooned a try, didn't he? He dropped a ball when he should have scored, but scored a fantastic try at the end of the Souths game to seal the win. And he's a player who needs a bit of confidence back after this season.
Confidence looks the key word, doesn't it? He's had a run of games now, and he seems to be getting used to the NRL, and I think it'll be good for Wigan because if he'd come back on having played a handful of games at the beginning of the year for the Roosters and then slipped down to reserve grade, that might have knocked his confidence a bit. But the way he's going as an NRL regular, he's scoring match-winning tries. He's going to come back full of confidence, you would think.
You do wonder whether he's regretting that decision to come back, and maybe he should have given it another year. But I'm sure Wigan and Wigan fans will be absolutely delighted, given that they're losing Charnley.
It's no good going down to the NRL to become a better player and not playing in the NRL because you're not going to improve, and you don't improve on the sideline. And if you're going to play reserve grade anywhere, that's the place to play it. But he is a kid that's needed game time. He's finally getting it. he bombed a couple of tries where he's been over the try line and dropped the ball. But as much as he scored a great try at the end of that game, Dave, he looked very secure under the high ball. I think he's probably lost his England place based on the fact that he's just been so out of favour down in the NRL. But I think that when he does come back next year, we're going to see a real operator and someone who is going to be an international for years to come.
Well, we don't know that he's lost his England place, do we? Because we've not had an England game.
No.
But,
and if Wayne Bennett does lean towards NRL players,
well,
if he finishes the season playing
every week.
every week.
Like this, I suppose he puts himself back in
I did think though,
contention.
last year when we played the New Zealanders, Steve McNamara picked him in London on the right wing, and he's very much a left winger. He then got dropped, and that was an opportunity for Jermaine McGilvray to come in. And it's interesting that McGilvray now is probably feeling a bit more secure because of the very sad injury to Dominic Manfredi, who was a great threat on that. I think I've really admired Manfredi. I think he's a terrific player.
That really is. It's a big loss all round.
It is.
Right, let's get to the questions from you the viewer. This is from Leeds lad, Scott Neasty, who says, the fans want it, the players want it, why doesn't the RFL back a return to Yorkshire v Lancashire? None of you got any warning about these questions? Just throw them at you.
Because there's no room in the fixture list. We keep talking about introducing, they've promised Wayne Bennett a mid-season international next year. Yeah, the Exiles experiment went the way of it. We've increased the number of regular season games as it is to 30. There just isn't room. So unless somebody does something radical with the Challenge Cup.
How about this? We mentioned this before. Get rid of the Magic Weekend. Well, don't get rid of the Magic Weekend and have that as a quarterfinals, Challenge Cup quarterfinals. We mentioned that before. So that's in June, and then your Challenge Cup runs out June, July, and then at the end of the regular season, we have. Maybe that's your Magic Weekend. The first weekend of the playoffs up in Newcastle. 1 against 8, 2 against 7, 3 against 6, 4 against 5. The bottom 4 losers go out of the competition. So even if you're first and lose, the chance
the man's lost the plot.
David, you're making a late bid to be the new Super League general manager. By the sound of it.
But that reduces. If you go back to those playoffs, it's overcomplicated, but we can find a way of reducing the fixtures. That's what I'm saying. If there's a will to have Lancashire v Yorkshire.
Yeah, there are too many.
If there was enough of a will for a Yorkshire-Lancashire game, but there isn't.
No, you need everyone to buy into it. And I think fans definitely want it. And in an ideal world, it'd be brilliant.
How do you know that?
I think you
because
get a good
the fans
feeling
didn't turn out in big numbers when we used to have those games.
But I don't think we made the most of those games and the players.
Because since the Battle of Bosworth Fields, we've been having a bit of a grudge match, with the boys over the hill, Martyn. And I think Yorkshire.
But the crowds were never that great. Were never that great.
You always got the feeling that the players weren't. They say they were, but you always get the feeling that players weren't as up for it as maybe they should.
And perhaps it wasn't marketed as well as it could have been, and it wasn't built into the event that it could be in an ideal world. But we don't live in an ideal world.
And now there are lots of players, quite a growing number of players who don't come from Yorkshire and Lancashire. In the competition.
Yeah, we don't want to end up with a state of origin where everyone qualifies for Yorkshire and Lancashire.
Lots of
a Cumbrian whose grandma was born in Hull.
Dominic Peters, I give you Dominic Peters.
Yeah, I remember that.
Who was a London lad, wasn't he? And he played for Lancashire. Well,
the press conference.
The press conferences, the Peter Fox and Alex Murphy era, the press conferences were better than the matches. They were terrific. So we're saying no for Lancashire, Yorkshire.
I don't think it will ever come back. I don't think it will ever come back.
That's a shame. Right, Sir Despard writes in, tweets in, and says, what are your views on dual registration in Championship and League One? I'll throw you to this, Martyn. I'll throw it to you. You were trying to sidestep that.
I was trying to give that one to Gareth, because Gareth has strong views on that, and I share them. I just don't like dual registration. I don't like to see players playing for a club when it's not their prime club, and I just think it tends to dilute interest in the lower clubs when you see somebody from Leeds or Wigan or whoever playing for those sides, that they're not genuine players for that club, in my view. I just don't like it.
I'll say, I've got strong views, and I'll say, first of all, I think it can work in some situations. If you take a young lad from a Super League club who spends a certain amount of time and forms an association with that club. We saw Joe Green.
Send him there for a year. Send him there for a year.
Well, that's a loan, isn't it? That's a loan. That's a loan.
Fine.
Yeah. And frontline first team players dropping down into Championship and League One. I don't think it works for the players themselves. You see so many players I've spoken to say they don't like it after it's happened. They won't say it when it's happening. And I don't think it distorts the competitions. I don't think as many clubs are doing it as they were before. I'm not a fan.
The only people it really works for are the Super League financial directors. you know, this game below Super League is in absolute disarray because of the absence of a reserve level.
Yeah.
We need a healthy, vibrant, properly structured reserve level that every club can invest in. It's been the bad news story of this year for me, because we talked about Sheffield, Dewsbury lost theirs. Clubs are, you know, have we got one, haven't we got one?
Dewsbury wanted to run one.
Dewsbury wanted to run one.
They wanted to have young players playing for the club,
and couldn't get games, which is absolutely ridiculous. Ian Lennigan at Wigan just wanted to have a little Northwest one, you know, just to keep the boys ticking over in the background. Nobody wanted the RFL to take ownership of it.
Yeah.
The Super League clubs didn't have a combined will to do it. It needs sorting out, and I think that until we do, we will continue to be a second-rate competition.
I think
compared
so.
to the others.
I've heard the RFL said they've kind of left this decision to the clubs if you want to run one. But to me,
But they're supposed to be running the game.
Absolutely,
You know,
you should be. If you're in Super League,
game.
especially, and probably the Championship, you should have to run a second-tier club, and it should be no argument.
But that has to come from the Super League clubs.
Yeah. One of the best.
But it should come from the top for me. The RFL, that should be a directive. Everything can't be decided by the clubs because some will try and save money.
The trouble with saying we'll leave it to the clubs is that the clubs always make short-term decisions based on their own short-term financial
their own
considerations. And so they're always going to look at what can we do to save the most money.
So Leeds can throw players to Hunslet and to Featherstone.
Just crazy.
And
who are the top four in Super League this year? They all run reserve.
They run reserve teams.
I'm going to get in there. One of the best suggestions was on this programme, I thought, actually, from Michael Steele, the Halifax chairman, who the other week said, well, let's reverse dual registration. All the Super League teams have to run a reserve team, and if they've not got the squads, because Michael Carter was saying, well, we can't afford to have a full squad, pair up with a Championship or a League One team, and their junior players get dual-regged to the Super League's reserve team. It just seems a remarkably good idea.
I think that
too
is a good
simple.
idea.
Too simple to be true.
Yeah. Too simple to
Don't
work.
look at me when you say that. Too simple to be true. Right. Let's move on to Viking Rod. Wouldn't you like to have a nickname, Viking Rod? On you've had that name over the years, haven't you? On Twitter, who's talking about Toronto and talking about a 14-team Super League. You know, if Toronto are fit for purpose, then how about getting them into a 14-team Super League? And at the end of each year, we have a £1 million game or £2 million games between the bottom two and the top two in the Championship. So
it'd actually work out either Toronto or Toulouse probably playing in that £1 million game to get into Super League. 14-team Super League, if it means that if everybody is financially viable, if it meant that we could reduce the fixtures so you could have your Yorkshire, Lancashire and an international mid-season break.
There would then be 26 rounds, wouldn't there, with 14 teams.
Then actually, bring it on. But whether that would be fair, it would only be fair if you were a club like Toronto or Toulouse that can spend up to the Super League salary cap, and then you'd have a level playing field, but then you'll be cutting adrift effectively. The rest of the
I like the idea, but it's the
rest
drop,
of the
the drop between them.
You'd be cutting adrift the Championship.
You couldn't have those full-time teams in the second tier probably then.
No.
And while again in this ideal world 14-team Super League I think would be great, but my leaning is more towards two smaller top divisions where your second tier can be full. Where your second tier can be pretty much full-time, and then this whole promotion relegation thing wouldn't be as big an issue because the second tier would be full-time.
Well, I disagree with you on that, Gareth, because if you had 10 teams in Super League playing each other 3 times a year, I think we're finding at the moment that fans don't want to watch 3 matches a year between.
They're getting 4 and 5.
Teams. Well, they are in some cases.
Even Wigan Saints the other night, which was a really important game in the context of the season.
5,000 less than they got a month earlier.
And it didn't feel like,
people are we're killing the goose that lays the golden egg. If you've got 14, I mean, at the moment we've really got 13 Super League teams, haven't we? Because Lee are a Super League team in all but name, so we're trying to fit 13 into 12 really. I think I'm a great believer in expanding Super League 14 ultimately to 16 perhaps. Let's have more variety, not less. I think going down to 10 teams would be a killer.
I think we'd risk milking it. We'd risk milking it too much, and that familiarity does build contempt. But of course, Toronto and Toulouse are going to throw something brand new into the mix, and I think we're going to go around again with the 12s and 8s next year, no doubt. But beyond that, Dave, I think we'll be having this discussion again.
It's what happens below that. The top division could be great with 14 or 16. It's what happens below that. And how do you then still give those clubs the opportunity
to
progress?
What's happening below that now? We've got a 12-team Super League. We've had the best chance in my memory, of a team in the lower division getting into the top division, and yet clubs are going bust.
Yeah.
You know, Sheffield's going bust, Bradford's gone bust.
Well, the clubs go bust in every system that we do, don't they? They did it under licensing. I think, to me, this system is responsible for clubs
I
going
don't
bust.
think the
I don't
system's
buy
responsible.
that,
I think
Well, I do
management.
because
Bad management
that's the
is-
one common theme in any club going is management.
The point is, we brought in 2 divisions in 1973, and in 1973, prior to doing that, we'd got a lot of strong, quite strong clubs all over the place. But the trouble is, then a lot of clubs became yo-yo clubs. Clubs like York were very strong, but then became
when Wigan got promoted back to the
clubs.
top division. York were actually top of the division.
They were, but they've just gradually, went up and down, up and down. When you've got promotion relegation, it encourages clubs to spend what they've not got, trying to remain in the high division and then trying to get promotion to it.
Yeah.
And that's been the curse of rugby league for many years.
We just need 28 billionaire benefactors then.
Ideally, would be
Well,
rather nice,
maybe it's
wouldn't it?
simply a case of we look at the picture and say there's potentially 14, 15 Super League clubs, and other clubs, have to be
Well, the Super League
realistic about
managers,
where they
the Super League chairman would love that, or at least a certain faction of them would.
Yeah.
Because that's what they've been going for the last 3 years.
Okay.
Is to take control of the game.
We're going to have to wrap it up. We're going to talk about the fixtures coming up, but very quickly, in a word, Challenge Cup winners this weekend. In a word.
Hull.
Hull.
Oh, I'll have to say Warrington now because just to redress the balance. So that's as far as we go this week. But just to remind you what's coming up on this channel on Premier Sports in terms of the NRL coverage and some mouth-watering matches to look forward to as well. Friday morning, this is early morning over here, of course. It's the Melbourne Storm against the Brisbane Broncos at Amy Park. That could be one of the games of the weekend. Certainly sets things up for the Challenge Cup weekend as well, doesn't it? Then on Saturday, we got the Manly Sea Eagles against the Canberra Raiders. Again, that should be juicy. The Titans against the Panthers. And following that, it is the Cronulla Sharks against the Sydney Roosters. 2 games on Sunday, August 28th. Warriors against the Tigers. Warriors desperately trying to get themselves into the top 8, of course. Knights against the Rabbitohs. Will it be another defeat for the Newcastle Knights? And then on Monday, we've got Parramatta Eels against St George Illawarra Dragons. So that is your fare. And don't forget, you can check all this and more at www.premiersports.tv. Don't forget the S, www.premiersports.tv. So that's as far as we go for this week's Back Chat. Thanks as ever to our panel of Danny Lockwood, Martyn Sadler and to Gareth Walker. Enjoy your weekend and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.